speaking of the budget and the studio influence of The Exorcist, that's not the case with Texas Chainsaw. Texas Chainsaw is a cheaper, grittier movie and definitely not a big budget studio venture, but also very much a product of the 70s and the ability for more kinds of movies to break out. You could see more independent cinema starting to break out because instead of having to be under the Hays Code, you don't have to be as mainstream. You can make a smaller movie and break out
Right.
because there's actual different standards going on at that point. And Texas Chainsaw is this gritty movie. Like it's obviously, I don't want to say the polar opposite of The Exorcist, but it's a very different style of film, a very different style of horror. And in many ways, I would call it like a pure horror movie.
Right.
Like probably the most perfect, in my opinion, the most perfect example of that kind of movie. Because talking about sequels, and Texas Chainsaw has sequels and remakes, and most of which I have not seen. But what's interesting is like when you have a sequel, say all the sequels to Halloween, for instance. Halloween is this very pure horror movie. Here's Michael Myers. We know he's a killer. He's pure evil, even as a kid. And he gets out later and he is pure motivation, evil killing. There he goes. When the sequels started happening, they feel the need to add something. And not to say that depth can't matter or be helpful, because obviously that's silly to argue against depth and development. But so many times you have, oh, we got to figure out why is Michael Myers after Lori,
Right.
and oh, they have a family connection, or oh, we got to learn more about Michael Myers and why he is the way he is, or all the different ways that you have family connections or uh, rationalizations for the villain. These sorts of things. I don't want to say get in the way, but it's almost inevitable that you kind of clutter up sometimes the purity of a story the more you kind of go into sequels and so forth or beyond something. The original Texas Chainsaw Massacre is, I think, even more pure than the original Halloween because it's just like you don't even get the here's Michael Myers introduction. It's like, oh, here's a bunch of young people going out on a trip and they just happen to run into this family of evil people. And the evil people, they weren't expecting this group of young people. They weren't inherently hoping for that. There's no build up or motivation trying to rope these people in. It just kind of happens. And that it's just the encounter itself just kind of happens. And I suppose I could see where somebody could say that I want more, than that. But I think this movie does that sort of pure storytelling incredibly well and incredibly effectively. Where not to get too grandiose about it, but it's part of the reason I think the movie works for me and that I think so much of it is because you have this kind of handling of what evil is, you know, the the idea of who are these people, this family, and so forth. But uh, you don't know where you could or couldn't run into evil,
Right.
and it doesn't have to be this supernatural thing or this epic sort of story or anything else. It doesn't have to be, oh, and now we learn about how this character became evil and the trauma they experienced and why they have rationalized becoming evil. Instead, it's just almost fundamental in a way that you could run into something that's evil, and obviously a terrifying prospect. But like when I think about one of my pet peeves is say with a school shooting or something to that effect, when it happens in somebody's community and you always hear somebody say, I didn't think it would happen here. It's one of my biggest pet peeves because obviously they could mean, boy, is this ever surreal for it to be happening here or to be happening to me. You hear about it happening, but it actually happened in front of me in my community or perhaps literally to me. That is incredibly surreal. But often I feel like because people literally say it, what I think people are saying is not just that it's surreal, but that, well, we have a good community and I see all types of good people in my community and everybody's nice here and we live together and work together and play together and, like all these positive attributes or
Right.
we have a good law enforcement. We have good law enforcement here. Whatever it is, people will say, I can't believe it happened here because we have a good group of people, because we are pure in some way. And it's a pet peeve of mine, hopefully obvious enough before I even say it, but I don't like if you see that it is a possibility that something dark or terrible could happen in the world, then of course it could happen to you. It doesn't mean that it's inevitable,
Right.
but it does mean that it could happen to you. You're not somehow above or beyond that darkness happening to you. And obviously, you should try to deal with that. It's not to say, oh, it's just inevitable and there's nothing we can do about it. But it does mean that it is something that exists and it could happen to you. So, as much as you shouldn't be paralyzed by fear and not go on a random trip out into the middle of nowhere with your friends to go to some house uh, that you know about to possibly play and just hang out in the summertime. But there is something terrible that could happen to you. And maybe you shouldn't pick up that hitchhiker and maybe not go exploring a house where you don't know for sure if somebody is or isn't in there. But even if it looks abandoned from the surface. But again, not that you should be paralyzed by fear. Uh, no, I just think that the movie, like I said, I try not to go too unwieldy on a tangent there, but uh, it's just the idea of how purely this story deals with that idea of, and it just happened, and it just happened to these people, and we don't really get to know them in a deep way. But one of the other things that I think is incredibly clever about the movie is they feel real, but they also don't feel completely like stereotypes. Because so many times you have these kinds of movies, and it's like, oh, and here's the nerd, and here's the this, or the, here's the buxom blonde, and instead they just you just feel like real people,
Right.
and they could possibly be obnoxious at times, but they also deep down have, I feel like, what's almost a fundamental goodness. Like if you look at the very end of the movie, which is intense and terrifying, but what else you see is like when these people uh, are encountered on the road and they see a woman being chased, they don't run away. So many horror movies deal with the way that people ignore the violence around them.
Right.
And in this movie, there's almost like a fundamental, like, oh, I need to stop and try to help her. And there's also this almost gravity to the way certain things are done, like very simple, subtle little filmmaking tricks. Because Toby Hooper is incredible, but you have that shot that goes underneath the swing,
Yeah.
walking up to the house to investigate. And what just happened to my friend in there? And it's just a simple shot, but so much could be said about how the movie looks dark and gritty because it does, but it's also impeccably well made. And you have a shot like that that's not just a good shot; it like enhances the idea of something the character's not even aware of,
Right.
the impending doom. I don't know. Have you seen Hereditary?
I have not.
So I don't want to by any means spoil that movie, but there's something else this movie does, which is uh, it goes into fundamental fear that could get so intense and so ingrained in you that you would run out of a window. And I've never seen that type of thing done so well until Hereditary. Again, not to spoil Hereditary, but I'm really just praising Texas Chainsaw by saying like how effectively it gets across the idea that you could believe a character would just be embroiled by fear,
Right.
sitting in that butcher shop with the door open, like not knowing when the guy with the chainsaw may or may not show up again, being left alone for a moment and not just hoping for any sort of relief, but then ultimately not even getting it.
Right.
The movie's just, like I said, it pure horror movie and one of my favorite horror movies in again a very different way than The Exorcist, but I absolutely love the way that this movie is kind of just this fundamental thing. What's your spin and take on Texas Chainsaw?
Well, it's just a formidable movie. I mean, it has a drive and look to it. And of course, again, the cheaper budget and look, but it doesn't look like just some cheap movie though. It's competently made. As Toby Hooper was a fantastic director to say the least, and I even think that as absurd as the number two of this series is, the only other Texas Chainsaw film to be directed by him is a brilliant movie too. It's just completely tonally different. But and then when you look at Poltergeist and see what he can do with a huge budget, um, and the production of Spielberg, that this guy was immensely talented. But I am all just equally impressed with what he does with a smaller budget, because the look and feel of this movie, the atmosphere in this one is killer as well, and completely different than the Exorcist. But the atmosphere in this movie is just, as you say, it's kind of as it happens. Ridley Scott actually pointed out in one of the documentaries for Alien, I believe, that the film he was constantly showing uh, while doing preparation while filming Alien was Texas Chainsaw Massacre, because he thought it was like the perfect, formidable horror film, and he was basically wanting to do Texas Chainsaw in space. And in a way, there are similarities. You got these hitchhikers, and I think this just speaks to how good this movie is. These hitchhikers or these kids are driving around. They end up picking up a hitchhiker, and it just kind of all goes sideways. And an Alien, you got these space truckers, and they end up getting a distress signal. They go investigate, and it all goes sideways. I mean, there's kind of a simplistic purity, as you said, to both of those. But the I the Leatherface is, of course, the thing that people, I think, and if they haven't ever seen a Texas Chainsaw movie, that's he's going to be the thing they know and recognize, because he's an iconic character. But I don't think, because a lot of times he gets lumped in as a slasher, like a Michael Myers or a Jason Voorhees, or and I don't think that's really fair or accurate, And I don't even, the other Texas Chainsaw sequels, as crazy as they are, they're not even really slasher movies either. It's really kind of this Sawyer family that is the kind of the evil, and kind of get overlooked in the I think in the broader public. But the little touches, the of the house, like that homestead, it's just terrifying. The shots of all the uh like the skeletons and animal carcasses, and the shot of the house looming kind of in a beautiful sky, like a pitch blue and clouds, but then this house just looms. It's terrifying. I i think that, as you said, this is just kind of like they're going along and this happens, and we see it in the tremendous amount of fear that they have, and it's realistic. I really believe, like Sally and all of them, like their fear in the moments that come. And another thing I think that's unfairly tacked on this movie is kind of that it has a lot of gore, um, and it doesn't. It has a lot of suggestion, and it has a lot of things that do happen, and you see it, but it's never shown directly to you. Or when it is, it's done in a way that's not gratuitous. Some of these kill scenes, the more disturbing thing to me about the kill scenes is not the gore or anything, because like I said, there's really not that much. It's like the acting, like when the guy gets hit in the head with a sledgehammer or with a hammer, and he just spasms
Yeah.
after he's dead, or when the girl get Pam gets put on a hook, and you basically just sit there and watch her die, watch her die. It's, or she has to watch her friend get chainsawed after he's been been killed too. Yeah, it's as she's sitting there with a hook in her. It's very disturbing, and I think all of that serves to the horror of the film even more, that it's not just blood and guts, that it forces you to imagine some things um, a little bit too, and that's even scarier. The I think the fear, just the is just pitch perfect. It comes to a crescendo really at the that dining room scene, which is to me the best part of the movie. Um, just so much tension. There's just been so much that's happened, and she's basically screaming hysterically the entire time. And Leatherface is all up in her face, wearing makeup, dressed like a woman. Um, but the old man, the hitchhiker from earlier, you know, they're just terrifying. They're sadistic, evil people, and just their sheer presence. It's hard to watch, even having seen it several times. It's a hard movie to watch, but in a good way. Like it's not a a popcorn film to me. It's I don't really feel comfortable when I watch Texas Chainsaw, and I think that that speaks highly of it, because that's what it's going for. It's not trying to be a comfort movie. And of course, you pointed out, I think, the ending like in Halloween, Laurie Strode's running around trying to get people to help. Um, and, people are like, whatever, crazy lady, turn their lights off. This, you got a trucker and then another person in a pickup truck, try to help Sally when they see her, covered in blood and run away from Leatherface. But my favorite part of that scene is like just the when she's laughing, like in the like she's going from screaming to laughing almost in like um without any pause. Like the screams become laughs as she makes it. The adrenaline, the ecstasy of getting out. And then of course the most probably the most iconic thing about the scene of this movie is the chainsaw dance uh, that Leatherface does, kind of in frustration or triumph, or who knows. But the experience of this movie it's one of a kind, and like I said, it's formidable. You put it in, there's like a sense of dread, foreboding that just kick in, like with that opening narration. Uh, this isn't based on a true story, although some things are taken from Ed Gein, which I think Ed Gein, if nothing else, has contributed to so many cinematic serial killers. I don't know. This is another A plus. I mean, just the atmosphere of this movie. It's one of a kind. It feels real. It feels like it really happened. A movie I often compare this to is Night of the Living Dead. Just because Night of the Living Dead is another film that was made on the cheap, but has this incredible tension and atmosphere and real feeling in the performances and in the execution of it as well. And this is that on an even uh like cranked up to 11, like on in terms of like just the fear and the adrenaline you feel watching it. It gets under your skin, and I feel that way every time I've seen it, and I've seen it a handful of times. And yeah, it just it's one of the best horror movies. Is another one that makes my top 10 easily, top five. It just has that power to it.
Obviously, Alien is a very different movie, but you can still see that influence. And I mentioned that shot that goes underneath the swing. There's a similar shot in Alien where Harry Dean Stanton is walking in, through the looking for Cat
Right.
Jonesy, and as he's walking into this space, and it's just kind of this tracking movement, and actually a tracking shot without him even in it, but it's just this feeling of impending doom, this feeling of approaching evil almost.
Yeah.
It's just a really effective, terrifying shot. Two different shots, very different movies, but that idea, that feeling that you get is incredibly palpable. And the idea of being treated like meat, just being treated like an animal, grabbed and just shoved onto a hook, that's obviously the way that that happens so fast is also part of its effect. Like, just imagine you're just walking around and it's a nice sunny day, and you're just out with your friends, and next thing you know, like, hey, what's happening over here? And you're being grabbed and shoved into a hook, and then you're put into a freezer and like treated like an animal, treated like a piece of meat. witnessing all this horror, it's effective just how immediate and terrifying, like a shot of Leatherface slamming that door shut. It's the effect is immediate, and the foreboding and the atmosphere of the movie is incredible as well. That dinner scene is something else, and also darkly humorous too in some ways. Handing over the hammer like beat her, and obviously there's not enough strength in that man to do anything. Hardly he's not going to be able to lift that mallet or do anything with it to damage somebody. He can't even hold it,
Right.
much less lift it and slam it on somebody. And at the same time, it's obviously still terrifying because
Right.
he's being assisted and because there's still this sense of danger. And like I said, I just really do just think it's just a pure horror movie. you know, if you wanted to know the essence of horror in a movie, I feel like that's the movie I would go to. It's an easy A+ for me as well. I don't know where exactly it would fall in a ranking of horror movies or movies in total, but it's definitely way up there in terms of fitting on that paradigm. And it's almost difficult to articulate exactly what it does so well in some ways too, because it just kind of is and it just kind of happens. But it's not like it. The movie's doing plenty within. There's so much craft within it, and so much that has this kind of power over you as you watch it that does indeed make it very uncomfortable.